James Carter had been to many strange worlds before, but nothing could have prepared him for this one. He stood in the middle of a massive hall, staring at the tall, silver doors that loomed ahead. The walls were made of smooth, gleaming metal, and the air was thick with the scent of something unfamiliar. He could hear the hum of machinery deep within the structure. It was both uninspiring and intimidating. He wasn't alone. Behind him, his team of soldiers, experts in every field of combat and diplomacy, waited quietly. They had been selected for this mission because of their abilities to handle delicate situations. Today, they were walking into a meeting with the Varelian Queen, the ruler of one of the most powerful alien empires in the galaxy. For months, tensions had been building between humanity and the Varelians. There had been rumors, whispers of conflict on the horizon, but nothing concrete. The humans had been sent to negotiate peace, to stop what could become a war between their two species. Everyone had warned James about the Varelians, their power, their pride, and their cruelty. They didn't trust humans, and some of their leaders even thought of humanity as a threat. Stay alert. And stay sharp. His commander, Captain Richard, whispered to him. This is no ordinary meeting. Don't let your guard down. James nodded. His hand instinctively brushed against the holstered weapon at his side, a reminder of the dangers they could face. Yet in this moment, his mind was less focused on weapons and more on the woman he was about to meet, the Queen of the Varelians. The doors opened with a quiet whoosh, and James stepped inside, leading his team. He didn't know what to expect, but nothing could have prepared him for what he saw. The throne room was vast, the floor made of polished stones that shimmered in the dim light. At the far end of the room, seated on a high platform, was the Varelian Queen. She was stunning, tall and elegant. Her features were sharp and defined, her skin a pale shade of silver, almost glowing. Her eyes were a deep violet, filled with a quiet power that seemed to pierce through him. The room fell silent the moment James stepped forward. His heart pounded in his chest, but he held his composure. Walking steadily toward the Queen, his team remained behind, standing in formation, but all eyes were on the monarch. As James approached, the Queen stood, her gaze never leaving him. It was a strange feeling, like the weight of the entire galaxy was pressing down on his shoulders. He had read the reports, studied her image, and heard the legends about her rule. But nothing could have prepared him for the reality of being. In her presence, then, without warning, the Queen knelt before him. Her movement was graceful, dignified, yet it carried a sense of respect, something James had not expected. The entire room gasped in unison. It was an honor, something only given to those who had earned the deepest respect in the galaxy. Varelians were a proud species, and their queen was not one to bow to anyone. James stood frozen for a moment, not knowing how to respond. This was not what he had imagined. He had expected tension, hostility, or perhaps indifference, but not this. The Queen, kneeling before him, had just shattered everything he thought he knew about the Varelians. "Rise, Your Majesty, James," said his voice steady, despite the surprise in his heart. The Queen's violet eyes flickered as she slowly stood back up, her expression unreadable. Her posture was perfect, regal, but there was something different in her gaze now. It was not the cold, distant stare of a ruler meeting a lesser species. It was something softer, almost curious. "You are the one," she said, her voice smooth and commanding, yet filled with an odd warmth. "The one spoken of in the prophecy." James frowned, confused. "The prophecy?" he repeated. He had heard rumors of prophecies before, but they were usually stories told to children. This seemed far too serious to be one of those tales. "Yes," the Queen replied, her voice growing quieter. "The prophecy of the human who will either bring us salvation or destruction. The one who will lead us when our empire faces its darkest." Her eyes locked onto his with a piercing intensity. "It is you, isn't it?" James felt a wave of unease wash over him. He had heard nothing about prophecies. He was just a soldier, no one special. He glanced over at his team, all of them equally stunned. This was far beyond anything they had prepared for. "I don't know what you mean, Your Majesty," James said slowly. trying to process the situation. "I'm here to negotiate peace, not to fulfill any prophecy." The queen didn't respond right away. She stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "You are not just a soldier, James Carter. You are the one destined to change the future of our people." He took a step back, unsure of what to say. This was madness. How could he, a human, be the key to the future of a powerful alien race? Before he could ask anything else, the queen raised her hand, signaling for silence. "Do not doubt it, human. The prophecy is real, and now it begins." The room fell into a deep silence. James could feel the weight of her words sinking in, but he didn't know what to think. Could he truly be part of something so important, something that could change the fate of two species forever? For the first time, James wondered if humanity's presence in the galaxy was not as insignificant as he had been led to believe. Would this strange, unthinkable moment be the start of something much larger than himself? End of part 1. James stood there, staring at the Varelian queen, unsure of what to say next. Her words hung in the air like a thick fog, impossible to ignore. The prophecy. It was a term he had never heard before, yet it seemed to hold immense weight in this moment. He had always thought of himself as just a soldier, one among many. Yet now, here he was, standing before a queen who seemed to believe that he was somehow the key to the future of her people. The queen's gaze softened as she watched him process what she had said. "Do you not understand, James?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. "The prophecy has been passed down for generations. It speaks of a human who will arrive in our time of need, someone who will change the course of our empire. That person is you." James shook his head slowly. This was all too much. "But I'm not special," he protested. "I'm just here to help with the peace talks, nothing more. Didn't come here to save anyone." Queen's expression remained calm, but there was a hint of something deeper in her eyes. Sadness, perhaps, or even pity. "It was never a choice," she said softly. "The prophecy chooses the human, not the other way around. And now you are here." James felt a chill run down his spine. He had no idea how to handle this. Was she really telling him that everything he had ever known was leading up to this moment? That he had been chosen for something he never asked for? Something he never even believed in? "Your people," the queen continued, "have long been underestimated. We Varelians thought we were the ones to shape the future of the galaxy. But the prophecy, it, tells us otherwise. Tells us that a human will come to our aid when we are weakest." James swallowed hard. The room felt smaller now, the air thicker. His team stood behind him, quiet and uncertain, watching the exchange. He glanced back at them briefly, but their faces mirrored his confusion and disbelief. None of them knew what to make of this. "So, what does this mean?" James asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What am I supposed to do? Lead your people? Fight in some kind of war?" The idea of him, a simple soldier, leading an entire empire of aliens, seemed ridiculous. The queen nodded. "Perhaps it means war. Perhaps it means peace. The prophecy does not give specifics, but it is clear that your role is vital." "A crossroads, James Carter. Our enemies are closing in, and our people are divided. You may not have chosen this path, but you must walk it." The weight of her words hit him hard. How could he, a man who had been taught to fight and protect, suddenly become a key figure in the fate of an entire empire? He was just a soldier, not a leader. He had no training in diplomacy or empire building. He had never been asked to do anything this important before, but as he stood there, looking at the queen, he could see the fear in her eyes, a fear that matched his own. She was strong, yes, but even the strongest of leaders could be brought to their knees in times of uncertainty. And this was a time of great uncertainty. The room fell silent for a long moment. James could feel the tension building. He could see the weight of the situation pressing down on the queen. She was not just a ruler, she was a mother to her people, protector of her empire. And now she had placed her trust in him. "Please," the queen said, breaking the silence. "You must understand that I do not wish this burden upon you. No one would wish it upon another. But the prophecy is clear, and I believe it is our only hope." James exhaled deeply. He didn't know what to say. He had never been the type to believe in fate or destiny, but standing here, facing the Queen's genuine plea, he couldn't deny that something was at work here. He had been chosen for a reason, whether he liked it or not. I don't know if I can do what you're asking, he admitted. His voice shook slightly, but he steadied himself. I'm just one man. How can I change the fate of an entire empire? Queen stepped forward, her gaze soft but filled with conviction. You are not alone in this, James. You have allies. You have the strength of your people behind you. And most importantly, you have the courage to do what must be done. James looked into her eyes, and for the first time he saw something that surprised him. Trust. The Queen trusted him. He was placing her faith in him to lead her people through what could be their darkest hour. Somehow in that moment, he realized that he couldn't walk away from this responsibility. Whether he wanted it or not, he was part of something much larger than himself. I will do what I can, James said finally, his voice steady. I don't know what's coming, but I'll stand by you, Your Majesty. I'll help however I can. Queen's eyes softened, and for the first time since he had met her, she smiled just a little. Thank you, James. You have no idea how much this means to me, to my people. James nodded, feeling the weight of her gratitude, and at that moment, he realized that this was just the beginning. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready to face it. Had no choice but to rise to the challenge, not just for the Virelians, but for humanity as well. The doors behind him opened, and his team stepped forward, their faces filled with a mix of curiosity and concern. They had seen the Queen kneel to James, but now they would see what he was truly capable of. James looked back at them and gave them a reassuring nod. This was just the beginning of a journey that would change everything. James had never imagined that he would be in a position like this. After his meeting with the Queen, he spent several days in the royal palace, trying to adjust to the overwhelming sense of responsibility that had suddenly been placed on him. The Queen, though kind and understanding, was firm in her belief that he was the key to their survival. As much as James wanted to deny it, the prophecy was becoming too real to ignore. The Virelian Empire was in trouble. Internal strife between the royal family and military factions was creating tension. The Queen's authority was being questioned, and enemies from other galaxies were closing in, sensing the weakness in her rule. James had come to understand the true gravity of the situation. The Virelians, once a mighty empire, were on the brink of collapse. I didn't ask for this, James muttered to himself as he walked through the grand halls of the palace. The walls were lined with paintings of past rulers, showing their triumphs and victories. He felt small and out of place, wondering how he, just a soldier, could ever fill the shoes of these powerful leaders. He turned a corner and came face to face with the Queen's advisor, a tall, serious Virelian named Leorin. His pale blue skin shimmered slightly under the palace lights, and his expression was always unreadable. James had spent a lot of time with Leorin since his arrival, but he still didn't fully trust him. The advisor was too quiet, too calculated. There was something about him that made James uneasy. James Carter Leorin said in his smooth, calm voice, "The Queen requests your presence. She wishes to discuss the next steps in the alliance." James sighed. Queen's discussions often turned into long meetings about strategy and leadership, but he couldn't afford to turn her down. The fate of both his people and hers depended on what happened next. "Lead the way," James said, following Leorin down the winding halls. When they arrived at the Queen's private chamber, the atmosphere felt tense. The Queen was sitting at a large table, her face serious, her hands resting on the table's surface. She looked up as James entered and gestured for him to sit across from her. The other Virelian leaders were already seated, waiting for his input. James suddenly realized that this was not just a simple conversation, it was a council of war. "James," the Queen began, her voice steady, "you've seen the state of my empire. You know the Virelians are on the edge of a civil war. The military factions want to challenge my rule, and I fear that if we don't act quickly, we will be torn apart from within. But there is another threat we cannot ignore." James sat up straighter, focusing on her words. He had heard rumors of external enemies, but he hadn't realized how close they really were. "The Zolrians," Queen said, her eyes narrowing. "They've been eyeing our resources for years. We can no longer afford to wait and hope for peace. We need a strong leader, someone who can unite my people and guide them into battle. Someone like you, James. The words hit him like a punch. He had been expecting a strategy session, but this was different. They were asking him to lead them into war. He wasn't prepared for that. He was a soldier, not a general. He had never led an army, especially not one of aliens. I don't know if I'm the right person for this, James said, his voice hesitant. I didn't come here to fight. I came here to help with peace. The Queen's eyes softened. I understand, James, but peace is a luxury we can no longer afford. The prophecy is clear. You are the one who will unite us. I've seen the strength in your heart, and I believe you are capable of leading us to victory. James didn't feel strong. He felt like a man lost in a strange world, trying to make sense of something beyond his control. But he couldn't turn his back on the Queen now, after everything she had entrusted to him. I'll do my best, he said quietly. But I'm no leader. I need help. I can't do this alone. The Queen nodded. You won't be alone. Leoran will assist you in building the strategy. The Varelian generals are ready to follow your lead. You will not fight this battle alone, James. James turned to Leoran, who was standing by the door, his expression unreadable. The advisor's presence in the room was unsettling, but James didn't have time to worry about it now. He had a role to play, and whether he liked it or not, the time for hesitation was over. Then let's begin, James said, his voice firming. As he stood up, the next several hours were a blur of maps, plans, and endless discussions. The Varelian generals spoke in their alien tongue, and Leoran would translate for James, explaining their strategies and the weaknesses they needed to exploit. The Zolrians were powerful, but they weren't invincible. James began to see how the pieces of the puzzle fit together. He wasn't a strategist, but he could understand the logic of the plans. His years of combat training helped him piece together what needed to be done. By the time the meeting was over, James was exhausted, but he knew something had shifted in him. He had taken the first steps in leading this battle, and though it scared him, he knew it was necessary. The Varelians were counting on him, and so was humanity. When the meeting ended, the Queen walked over to him, her footsteps echoing in the quiet room. You've done well, James, she said, her voice softer now. You are more than I hoped for. James gave a small, uncertain smile. I'm just trying to do what's right. The Queen placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip strong yet comforting. And that is all I can ask of you. As he left the room, James felt a sense of determination building inside him. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what lay ahead, but he knew he couldn't back down. The galaxy was watching, and he had to rise to the challenge. The fate of 2 species was now in his hands, and there was no turning back. The days that followed were intense. James was now fully immersed in the military planning and strategy sessions with the Varelian generals. The Queen had made it clear that there was no time to waste. The Zolrians were already moving toward their borders, and if they reached the heart of Varelian space, it could mean the end of the Empire. James had always thought of himself as a soldier, but this was something different. The weight of leadership was heavier than anything he had ever carried before. He wasn't just planning for a battle anymore. He was planning for the survival of an entire species. His mind raced with the complexity of the task ahead, but there was a part of him that understood the importance of what he was doing. As he walked through the corridors of the palace, he could feel the pressure mounting. The Varelian military was not like anything he had encountered before. Their ships were enormous, their weapons powerful, and their technology far more advanced than anything humanity had. And that, James knew, was where they could win. When he entered the war room, the air was thick with tension. The generals were already waiting, their faces grim. They were used to war, but this was different. They weren't just fighting for their empire, they were fighting for their future. James could see it in their eyes. They respected him, but they were uncertain. They didn't know if he could lead them to victory. James, the Queen greeted him as he walked in. She was seated at the head of the table, her expression calm but serious. Are you ready? James nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure if he was. We don't have much time, he said, glancing around the table at The Varelian leaders? What's the plan, Leoran? The Queen's advisor stood up. We've gathered intelligence on the Zolrian fleet. They're much larger than we expected. We found a weakness in their formation. They rely heavily on their flagship, the Zolris Prime. If we can neutralize their flagship, it will cripple their fleet. James thought for a moment. He wasn't a military expert, but he knew enough to see the opportunity. If they could take out the Zolrians' flagship, the rest of their fleet would lose their command and coordination. It was a risky plan, but it had potential. Do we have enough firepower to take out the Zolris Prime? James asked. Leoran hesitated. We do, but only if we can get close enough. The Zolrians' fleet is heavily guarded, and they have advanced weapons designed to keep us at a distance. James looked at the map on the table. The Zolris Prime was located at the center of the Zolrian fleet, protected by layers of defense ships. It would be nearly impossible to get close without being detected. But if they could find a way to get in without triggering their sensors, it could strike fast and hard. We need to use the element of surprise, James said, his voice steady. If we can infiltrate their fleet and launch a surprise attack on their flagship, we can take them down before they have a chance to react. The generals exchanged glances, and James could see their doubt. They were used to brute strength, not subtlety. But he had learned over the years that in war, sometimes the best weapon was not strength but strategy. We can use our smaller ships to infiltrate their fleet, James continued. We'll need to get in close without being detected, launch a surprise attack, and get out before they can retaliate. The Queen leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. It's risky, she said quietly, but it may be our only chance. James turned to the Varelian fleet commanders. We can do this, he said, but we'll need everyone on board. This will require coordination, precision, and trust. We need to move quickly. The room was silent for a moment, and then, one by one, the generals nodded. James could see their respect for him growing. They were beginning to believe in the plan. We will follow your lead, James, one of the commanders said. We'll need to be swift, but we can make it work. James felt a surge of pride. They were ready. For the first time, he truly felt like a leader, not just a soldier. He could do this, had to do this. The preparations for the assault began immediately. James worked with the fleet commanders to organize the ships and coordinate the attack. The plan was simple. The smaller ships would slip past the Zolrian defenses and get as close as possible to the Zolris Prime. Once in position, launch a surprise strike, disabling the flagship and sending the Zolrians into chaos. The rest of the fleet would then move in. Taking advantage of the confusion, as James worked alongside the Varelian leaders, he began to see the extent of their fear. The Queen was doing everything she could to hold her people together, but it was clear that she was just as uncertain as the rest of them. It wasn't just about winning the battle. It was about ensuring that her people had a future. I'm not sure I can do this. The Queen admitted to James one night, after everyone had left the war room. I've led my people for so long, but now I'm not sure what the future holds. James placed a hand on her shoulder. You're not alone, Your Majesty. You've built this empire. You've kept it alive for centuries. But now it's time for a new generation to take the lead. You've done more than enough. The Queen looked at him, her eyes searching. And what about you, James? Are you ready to lead us to victory? James nodded. I may not have asked for this, but I won't turn my back now. We'll win this war together. The night before the attack, James stood on the balcony of the palace, looking out over the vast city below. The stars above seemed distant and cold, just like the future he was about to face. But he wasn't afraid. He'd come this far, and he wasn't going to stop now. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, they would either succeed or fall. But James was ready. He had found a purpose he never expected. With that purpose, he would lead them to victory. The day of the attack arrived, and the air around the Varelian fleet felt thick with tension. James stood in the command center of the flagship, surrounded by Varelian officers. His heart pounded as the plan was set into motion. There was no turning back now. The fleet was ready, but so were the Zolrians. Everything depended on the surprise strike, The element of surprise was their only hope. If they failed, the Varelians would be lost. James walked over to the large screen, watching as the ships prepared for the assault. Smaller vessels were moving into position, ready to slip past the Zolrian defense lines and strike the Zolries. Prime, the flagship of the Zolrian fleet. Once that ship fell, the rest of the Zolrian forces would lose their coordination, making it much easier to defeat them. "Everything's ready," Leorin said, his voice low but confident as he joined James at the command center. "The fleet's in position, and the smaller ships are already moving into place. We can't afford any mistakes." James nodded, though his mind was racing. He had spent so many days planning for this moment, but now that it was here, he felt the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him. The lives of his people and the Varelians rested on this one decision. "Once we launch the attack, we'll only have a small window of time before the Zolrians realize what's happening," James said, his voice firm. "We need to be swift, and we need to make every strike count. If we hesitate, we're done for." Leorin glanced over at James, his usual calm demeanor unshaken. "Understood. We'll follow your lead, James. No hesitation." James felt a sense of gratitude wash over him. Despite the tension, he knew the Varelians were trusting him completely. He wasn't just a human soldier anymore. He was their leader, the one they believed could turn the tide of this war. "Prepare the fleet," James said, his voice steady as he looked around at the officers. "It's time." The countdown began. The fleet slipped into position under the cover of darkness. The smaller ships, like shadows in the void of space, moved quietly, undetected by the Zolrian defense systems. The Zolrians were confident, perhaps too confident. They hadn't expected such a bold attack. James stood beside the Queen in the observation room, watching as the action unfolded. Her presence was silent, yet it filled the room with an aura of power. The Queen, though known for her authority, had entrusted James with the most important battle in her reign. And now it was up to him to deliver. The first strike came swiftly. One of the smaller Varelian ships launched a volley of missiles at the Zolris Prime. The Zolrians, caught off guard, scrambled to defend themselves, but it was too late. The missiles hit their mark, and the flagship erupted in a series of fiery explosions. "Target the weaker ships," James barked. "Move in and finish what we started." His command echoed across the fleet, and within seconds, the Varelian ships moved into position. The battle began in full force. The sound of weapons firing, explosions shaking the very core of space, filled the air. The Zolrians fought back, but their fleet was disorganized, chaotic. The Varelians, guided by James' leadership, moved with precision. The battle raged on, but it was clear that the Zolrians were losing control. James had been right. Taking down the Zolris Prime had shaken their entire fleet. Without their flagship, they lacked the coordination to mount an effective defense. The Varelians pressed on, taking advantage of every opportunity. James watched the battle unfold, his mind sharp and focused. The strategy was working. Every strike, every move, was taking them closer to victory. He had never felt so alive, so powerful. But with every victory came the weight of the lives lost in battle. Each explosion, each ship that fell, reminded him that the cost of this war was steep. "James, we've done it." Leorin's voice came through the comms, his tone full of relief. "The Zolrian fleet is in full retreat. We've won." James allowed himself a moment of quiet triumph, but there was no time to relax. The war wasn't over yet. The Queen was still watching, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and sadness. She knew, as did James, that the Varelians had won this battle, but the war would continue. It would take time to rebuild, to restore the confidence of her people. The Queen walked over to James, her expression softening. "You've done it, James. I knew from the beginning that you were the one who could lead us to victory. You've proven me right." James met her gaze, but the weight of his words was heavy. "We've won this battle, but there's still more to come. The Zolrians won't stop. We need to be ready for what's next." The Queen nodded, her eyes reflecting the determination that had made her the ruler of her people for so long. "You're right, but today we celebrate." Today we honor the lives of those who fought and those who will continue to fight for us." James glanced out at the vast expanse of space, the battlefield still burning with the remnants of destruction. He couldn't help but feel a sense of pride mixed with uncertainty. There was still much to do, much to rebuild. The war wasn't over, and there were more challenges ahead, but as he looked at the Queen, standing beside him as a true ally, he realized something important. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for a future. And that future depended on their ability to work together, human and Varelian. "Together," James said quietly, "we'll rebuild. Together, we'll make sure this never happens again." The Queen placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch warm and reassuring. Together. And with that simple word, James knew that they were not just allies anymore. They were a team. They had faced the greatest challenge of their lives, and they had emerged victorious. But the real battle, the one for peace and for the future, had only just begun. The war had been won, but the aftermath was far from over. The battle had left its mark, not just on the Varelian fleet, but on James as well. The victory over the Zolrians had been hard-earned, and though their flagship had been destroyed, the cost of the fight still weighed heavily on him. The Varelians had suffered losses, too many for James to count, and he could see the same toll on the Queen's face. Though she was a ruler, a leader, she was also a person, one who now faced the daunting task of rebuilding her people's future. James had led the Varelians to victory, but as he walked through the palace halls, he couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty. The fighting had been brutal, and now they had to deal with the consequences. The Empire had lost soldiers, resources, and trust. The people, though relieved, were still frightened, unsure of what the future held. The Queen, too, had been shaken. As much as she had trusted James to lead them through the battle, she now found herself facing questions she hadn't anticipated. "James." The Queen called out to him as he entered her private chamber. Her voice was steady, but there was something beneath the surface. She was tired, but determined as always. "Come, sit with me." James crossed the room, taking a seat beside her. He knew this conversation was coming. The victory was important, yes, but the next steps were even more critical. They had to rebuild to ensure that what they had fought for wasn't lost in the aftermath. "James, you've done what no one thought was possible," the Queen began, her eyes meeting his with a look of respect. "You've led us to victory. And for that, we owe you more than we can ever repay." James shook his head, trying to push away the praise. "I didn't do this alone, Your Majesty. We all fought together. The fleet, the generals, even the civilians who supported us. This was a team effort." The Queen smiled, a rare softness in her eyes. "Perhaps. But it was you who brought us together. It was your courage, your leadership that made the difference. Without you, we wouldn't be standing here." James didn't know how to respond. He had always been a soldier, someone who fought because it was his duty. But this was different. This victory wasn't just about fighting. It was about saving a people, a culture, an entire empire. He had been chosen for this role, but it felt like too much. The weight of the future seemed heavier than any battle. "Now we must think about the future," the Queen continued, her tone growing more serious. "The war isn't truly over. The Zolrians may have been defeated, but there are still factions within our empire who don't trust each other. The military divisions, the royal family. They will need to be united if we are to move forward." James understood exactly what she meant. He had seen the power struggles during their planning sessions. The Queen had been dealing with rebellious generals and political factions long before the Zolrians had come into the picture. Now that the battle was over, those struggles would only intensify. The Varelians weren't united, not in the way they needed to be. "Do you think they'll follow you?" James asked, his voice filled with doubt. After everything that's happened, Queen didn't answer right away. She looked out the window, her eyes distant. "I have led them for so long, but this war has shown me that I cannot do it alone anymore. I need you, James. I need your help to restore order. You've earned their trust. You've proven you are not just a warrior, but a leader. Together, we can rebuild the empire." James took a deep breath. He had never wanted power, never sought leadership. But the Queen was right. The future of her people was at stake. They had won the battle, but they hadn't won the peace yet. They needed a plan to rebuild one that would unite the fractured factions and give hope to the people. "I'll help you, Your Majesty," James said, his voice firm. "But it's going to take more than just the two of us. We need to bring everyone together, and that's going to take time and trust. The people have to believe in us. In this future we're building." The Queen nodded, her gaze meeting his with a determination that mirrored his own. "Yes, it will take time. We have a foundation now. We have the strength to rebuild. And we will." The next few weeks were filled with endless discussions, negotiations, and meetings. James worked closely with the Queen and the Varelian generals to restore order. They needed to bring the different factions together to forge alliances and rebuild the trust that had been broken by years of division. It wasn't easy, and at times James wondered if it was even possible. But with each step, he saw progress. The generals who had once opposed the Queen were now beginning to see the wisdom in her leadership. They understood that her decisions, though difficult, were made for the good of their people. Slowly, the factions began to unite. The power struggles that had once seemed insurmountable were now being resolved. One by one, it wasn't just the military leadership that needed to change. The Queen knew that she had to rebuild the trust of the Varelian people as well. There had been too many years of fear and uncertainty. They had been through so much, and now they needed to see hope. They needed to believe that the future could be different. James worked tirelessly alongside her, helping her navigate the challenges of leadership. He had never imagined that he would be in this position, but the more he worked with the Queen, the more he realized that he had a unique opportunity. He wasn't just helping her, he was helping shape the future of two species. And that was something he couldn't walk away from. One evening, as the sun set over the Varelian capital, James stood on the balcony, looking out over the city. It was quiet now, the streets empty after a long day of negotiations. The air felt different, lighter. Somehow, the tension that had once been so thick was beginning to lift. The Queen joined him, her footsteps soft on the stone floor. She stood beside him, silent for a moment before speaking. "We've come a long way, James," she said, her voice filled with quiet pride, "and I couldn't have done it without you." James turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. "Did this together. You led your people, and I helped however I could. This is just the beginning." The Queen smiled. "Yes, it is. But with you by my side, I believe we can face whatever comes next." James nodded. For the first time since the war began, he felt truly hopeful. They had won the battle, and now they were ready to win the peace. Together, they would build a future. And that was worth fighting for.